Rand, I need another episode of Fully Cinematic.
With one huge exception, the MCU is particularly prone to sophomore slumps with regard to its sub-franchises. While Captain America and Doctor Strange boast sequels that are exponentially better than their debuts, Guardians of the Galaxy, Spider-Man, and even Iron Man hit foul balls during their respective second at-bats. But like his fellow Avenger Ant-Man, Thor struck all the way out. With that said, let's take one last look at Thor: The Dark World and then forget that it ever happened. Forever.
Rocky.
We start with a pretentious narration by Odin explaining the history of Malekith the Dark Elf and the Ether over imagery of this very lame-looking chronicle. Cut to Loki being brought before the aforementioned narrator in chains for a scolding and a pronouncement of his life sentence because of his failed invasion of Midgard during the Avengers. Thor is mentioned, so of course we cut, again, to him in a battle with his sidekicks and a contingent of miscellaneous weirdos. The hostilities are brought to an end when Odinson smashes the hell out of their champion, a rock giant who sort of resembles a swole version of Korg. Back on Asgard, Odin advises his son to retire from the field, forget about humans, especially Jane Foster, and focus on his transition to king. Lady Sif shoots her shot at him in the mead hall and they get smacked to the cheap seats. Meanwhile, in London, Jane's on a date, which is interrupted by her intern Darcy with some unfunny comic relief, and they head off with Darcy's intern Ian in tow to a gravitational anomaly in an abandoned building. The readings match the ones from New Mexico where Jane initially met Thor, and despite her status as a scientist, she neglects to seal off the area in any way, or even to send the multiple kids present away and ends up getting infected by the ether. For some reason, this awakens the elves, who've been unconscious for thousands of years, and they begin speaking Klingon. Thor, who misses Luke Skywalker's mom as much as she misses him, meets up with Heimdall for a chat, and the latter realizes that she's the one thing in the universe that he can no longer see. Goldilocks travels to London to find Kylo Ren's grandma, and when he does, she immediately slaps him. She's pissed that he abandoned her to save the world before being stranded on Asgard. After Matilda exhibits magic powers, Thor takes her to Asgard for tests. Odin takes an immediate disliking to her and provides another history lesson about the ether, which is a weapon created by Malekith in order to cover the universe with darkness, and the Dark Elves. Back on Svartalfheim, Malekith and his most trusted lieutenant Algrim plot their comeback, millennia after being vanquished by Odin's father Bor. Algrim sacrifices himself in order to become a nearly invincible monster nicknamed Curse. Frigga visits her adopted son Loki in the Bing, where he throws a tantrum. For the second time in her career, Natalie Portman goes on a romantic outing on an alien planet with a tall dude with magic powers and a melee weapon who's believed to be the chosen one for his people. Back on the Lifeless tier, Curse transforms, murders a bunch of COs, and comes face to face with Loki. Thor heads off to quell the prison riot while Sif throws shady looks at Darth Vader's baby mama. Meanwhile, Malekith's invasion force shows up on Asgard in invisible ships to have goofy-looking dogfights high above the palace. One fighter crashes into the throne room, unleashing Malekith and his strike force. The head elf locates Frigga, and when she refuses to divulge the location of the ether, Curse shanks her to death. Thor shows up just after the nick of time, injuring Elf number 1 before he and his henchmen escape. The entire kingdom turns out for Frigga's Viking funeral, minus Loki, who's still confined to his cell. On Midgard, Dr. Eric Selvig gives a science lesson to Stan Lee and a bunch of other psych ward inmates. He's still feeling the effects of Loki's mind control during the invasion. On Space Kattegat, Thor and Odin argue about how to proceed. Darcy gets another pointless scene as Zeus convinces Heimdall to commit treason by joining his band of merry men in a prohibited mission off-world to take the fight to the elves. He also recruits Loki, who shows off some illusion tricks, which is mostly a lame excuse to feature a sort of Captain America cameo. This would be his first, but unfortunately not his last, trash cameo in another hero's film series. And it's without doubt the worst part of an already terrible movie. Why bring Steve Rogers into this show? Anyway, Sif of all people frees Senator Amidala from protective custody. Heimdall confronts the Thor father, and everybody threatens to kill Loki. Later, the reunited brothers and the Queen of Naboo evade the Asgardian Air Force and the downed fighter before switching rides to Fandrul's hoverboat, which they use to escape the planet via Loki's secret route out of town. The Bickerson brothers argue again, this time about dear old mom. Darcy and Ian sign Dr. Selvig out of the nut house. He continues his Renfield impression of Loki's Dracula in the Avengers. On Elfworld, as soon as Blonde Justice uncuffs Loki, he stabs him and cuts off his hammer hand, before immediately handing Black Swan over to Malekith.
Oh, hell no.
But when he drains the ether out of her, the betrayal is revealed to be a ruse concocted by Odin's boys. Blonde Ambition never lost his hand, and he calls a lightning strike down on the ether in a vain attempt to destroy it. He fails, naturally, allowing Malekith to possess it before hauling ass in an invisible ship. He leaves some of his troops behind, including Curse, who's destroyed by Loki, who soon succumbs to the stab wound inflicted by the former. Thor and Padme's sickening love talk is interrupted by a call from her blind date, Richard, which causes her to realize that, contrary to their fear that they're stranded in Elfville, they can conveniently just walk to Earth. The happy couple is soon reunited with Darcy and Dr. Selvig, who deduces the danger that Malekith poses to the universe. Thor confronts Legolas in London while the nerds manipulate gravitational anomalies. While the RAF attacks Malekith's ship, Ian saves Darcy's life by dropping a car on a group of elves, which earns him a kiss. Blonde Fury hits Malekith with a couple of Selvig's devices before dropping the hammer on her, and just when the mothership begins to fall onto the newly reunited couple, it falls through an anomaly and crushes its owner. Back on Asgard, Legally Blonde turns down the throne during a chat with Odin, who, wait for it, turns out to be Loki in disguise. And the epilogue features Volstagg and Sif handing the ether over to the Collector for safekeeping. In the post-credits scene, Atomic Blonde teleports back to London to give Padme a big weapon. Now that all that book out of the way, where to start? The Dark Elves are even more bland and unmemorable than the first movie's Frost Giants, and the Viking Age iconography, laser guns, and starfighters make for a truly garbage combination. The tone is all over the place, careening recklessly from completely unfunny attempts at humor to wholly uncompelling and woefully over-the-top melodrama. Rumor has it that Marvel was going for a Game of Thrones vibe with this trash. Director Alan Taylor did helm 7 episodes of GOT, but Thor 2 doesn't even live up to the widely hated final season. Don't get me started on the weirdly sappy yet simultaneously unconvincing love story. Ian and Darcy's romance is more compelling than Thor and Jane's. And Anthony Hopkins has always been horrible at choosing roles in the action genre, and his Odin in the Thor movies, especially this one, certainly upholds that piss-poor tradition. Aside from all of this other ups, The Dark World doubles down on the MCU's decision to give its Norse people off-brand Downton Abbey accents. You know, when you screw up royally, the best course of action is to stop what you're doing. They recast Warmonger, Fandral, and Bruce Banner, and even let Chris Hemsworth stop bleaching his eyebrows. But I guess they're sticklers for continuity when it comes to cultural intonation. Well, at least Chris's costume is less cheap looking. If you want to see a dark fantasy about Vikings, skip this unwatchable show and check out The Northman instead. In other news, it's time to highlight a few comments that viewers left on previous shows. Responding to my review, let's take one last look at Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and then forget it ever happened, forever. Fresh Out the Shower said, love the title. I don't know whose idea it was for the whole middle part of this movie, but it killed the momentum. The clone daughter part fell out of place, but I get what they were trying to do. The ending, even though it left me scratching my head, made me feel better. I knew we would get a third installment and chance for redemption. I couldn't agree more, Fresh. Danielle M. chimed in with, I actually enjoyed these movies. I enjoyed the episode, though. Thanks, Danielle, but I think a couple of those movies are trash. And commenting on the Death vs. Heard defamation trial show, makes $750 per day left the quote, all progress takes place outside the comfort zone. Agreed. Shout out to Fresh Out the Shower, Danielle M. and makes $750 per day for dropping comments. And shout out to everybody who hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But I've had enough of this conversation and I'm logging off.
Fully cinematic.